All right, hey guys, this is the second part of Module 8.3 notes. So we're going to start talking about relationships, dealing with marriage and divorce, and then domestic violence and leisure and work in this video to close this out with 8.3. So when we talk about marriage, there's a lot of ups and downs that your book talks about with marriage. So marriage can have a lot of benefits, and for those marriages that don't work successfully, there can be a lot of unhealthy benefits, if you want to call those that as well, for divorce that can occur. So with marriages, there's a lot of characteristics that partners take into account when we talk about life satisfaction. So something that research shows us is that not all marriages decline in satisfaction as we get older. So for marriages that are still viable in middle adulthood, not all of them end in divorce. But we do see an increase in divorce in middle age for a lot of different reasons. But overall, not all marriage satisfaction declines in middle adulthood. Some marriages actually thrive a whole lot more in middle adulthood than before. So there's a lot of different coping mechanisms that relationships go through in regards to partners have to work on to keep their marriages healthy. So having realistic expectations continue throughout the course of the relationship, even into middle adulthood. Focusing on the positive, not just the negative with one's partner. Compromising. And then, of course, making your voices heard if there's something you are unhappy about. And that last bullet point, avoiding suffering in silence, is one of the main reasons why couples get divorced. Because for some, it's hard for them to express how they are unhappy in their marriage. They don't know how to verbalize that. And just because you're unhappy doesn't mean it can't be changed. And a lot of times I think that couples that go through divorce don't want to work on that change. They think it's too hard. Now, granted, everybody has their own idea of marriage, and there's some behaviors that some people just, don't want to work through, like infidelity, things like that. But for others, they can work through those because usually once they do, it can make the marriage a whole lot stronger. So it's really a difference in how partners see their relationships. So divorce, we know, still occurs amongst half of all marriages as well. Even in gay and lesbian marriages, there are still staggering instances of divorce. We see divorce increasing in midlife for a lot of different reasons. One could be children leaving home. The stresses of the marriage with children leaving home can implicate more stress and can cause other things to occur. With children growing in age, a lot of times parents think that they no longer need to stay together for the sake of the kids. That as the kids age, they'll be able to accept the divorce and do better with the divorce than if the kids were younger, things like that. Women typically don't fare as well when they go through a divorce, especially if they don't have a career of their own, if they can't support themselves, things like that. But for a lot of women, it gives them an opportunity to go and kind of reinvent themselves, seek out a new career, or begin a career they never had and do something differently. And this new, attitude of independence and not having to rely on somebody comes across as something that's, beneficial when a divorce occurs as well. So marriages unravel for a lot of different reasons, infidelity being one of those. People leave marriages because they're unhappy and they don't really want to take the time to work and figure out how can they change being unhappy. In a lot of cultures, and especially in our Western culture, I think it's become more socially acceptable. If you're unhappy, then just leave. Leave the marriage and we really don't talk too much about working on the marriage. Why are you not happy in the marriage? What can you do to fix that? It's just much easier to go see a lawyer and start divorce proceedings as well. And of course, for some women, especially wives, they feel more financially obligated for the husband because the husband makes the money, they don't, things like that. So there's a lot of different reasons for divorces to be taking place. And again, they're culturally specific as well. In some cultures, there is no such thing as divorce. You don't get divorced. It takes a lot of time and effort to get divorced. So you have to think about those as well. So remarriage does occur. Statistically, within 2 to 5 years, people who are divorced usually get remarried. But again, remarriage, depending on the social supports and the relationship, can bring its own stress as well, especially if there's other children involved as well. Women tend to have a harder time to remarry, especially middle-aged women, because of their age factor. They're working, they may not have time to date, they're taking care of themselves and their kids, things like that. And of course, kind of look at the stigma that's attached with the middle-aged woman versus, a young woman in their 20s or 30s. So sometimes that plays into how quickly a woman in middle age gets back onto the dating scene and remarries as well. Differences in second marriages, again, like I say, they tend to be more mature in their relationships, more realistic, because they understand why the previous marriage failed. If you have to look at relationships and bringing in children, those type of stressors can impact the second marriage as well. So empty nest syndrome, of course, is when children leave the home. It can be stressful for the parents because they have this newfound, identity where they're no longer caring for the children. They can focus on their careers or other outside interests. So parents may verbalize that they're happy with empty nest syndrome when their kids leave the home, but internally, that's not always, of course, how they feel. So, and of course, you can go through, they talk about helicopter parents where they tend to micromanage, kind of think about your parents right now, those of you that are still living at home. Do your parents still try to micromanage your college career and your work schedule, things like that? So it's kind of like the attention of the parents shift to something else when they realize their kids are a lot more independent than they previously were. Boomerang children, or children that have successfully left the nest and then they have jobs, they have families, but usually for financial reasons, they move back to the home for whatever reason, and they stay for a period of time before they find their own home again and they move back away. And then the sandwich generation is where you have parents taking care of their parents and their children at the same time, and usually in the same house. We see this becoming more and more the case, especially as parents get older because we're living longer, and your parents may take care of them instead of putting them in an assisted living home or a nursing home, because those can be quite expensive and insurance may not pay for those. So the relationships can become stronger and, of course, a little bit more stressful as your parents are trying to juggle caring for their parents and caring for you as well. Grandparents, of course, is a time period that brings a lot of joy for them. Grandmothers typically become more involved in their grandchildren's life than their grandfathers, but that's not always the case. Just on more generalization do we see that. There's a lot of pluses and minuses to being grandparents. We see relationship differences. African American grandparents tend to be more involved than Caucasian grandparents because of cultural variations and the close, tight-knit groups of those families as well. Spousal abuse in the United States has drastically increased. There are a lot of factors that come into play Low economic status is one. Growing up in a violent home, children who witness the abuse tend to be abusers as well. Single parent families have a lot of stress, so they, of course, have a little bit more violence than families that have both parents in them as well. Women tend to be the victims of abuse more than men, but we do soon see men being the victims as well. And then Lenore Walker proposes this stage of abuse. And I'm going to show you this kind of cycle right here. Tension building, this is where a lot of stress occurs. It's kind of like the wall keeps building, building, building. And then some catalyst event happens, and this is where the violence occurs. And then after the violence occurs, the woman, the victim, feels like it was their fault. What did they do to warrant the abuse? And then usually the abuser is, remorseful. I'm so sorry. I'm never going to do it again. And then the whole cycle just kind of goes in this circle over and over again. So those are the stages of violence. You have tension building, acute battering incident, and then loving contrition. And we see this over and over again. When I was in my undergrad, I had to work at a domestic violence shelter for a whole semester, and I worked with women who would keep continuously coming back to the shelter for various reasons because they felt like it was their fault, that they deserved the violence, and there was nothing that they could do to stop the violence because it was their fault. And it was a very sad semester hearing these women's stories and what the violence did for them. Society, of course, we know there's different cultural roots of violence. In some cultures, it's more acceptable for women to be victims because men have the upper hand in the hierarchy, if you will, of power in those cultures. And we know there's a lot of rules and laws that go into play here in Western culture with victims of violence as well. So there's a lot of things you can do to help stop the violence. It's never acceptable, ever. It's never the victim's fault as well. So if you have a friend or if you yourself ever become a victim, please know it's not your fault and there are ways to get help. So work and leisure, just real quick, kind of finishing this up. Job changes can be evident in middle adulthood. It can be a great time of a lot of prosperity, a lot of enjoyment in work. People in middle adulthood tend to do their best work, earn the most money they've ever made, but they also tend to be a little bit more kind of workaholic because children are leaving, children are getting older, and they can spend more time at work as well. So burnout can be something that can occur. So you have to look at burnout and make sure that you're balancing work and life together as well. Unemployment can happen in middle adulthood, especially with technological advances. A lot of people's jobs are getting replaced by technology, and that leads them to being unemployed and then having to find new careers, which can be a lot of stress because, of course, as you age, who wants to hire a 60-year-old, when they only maybe have less than a decade left in the work world. So switching up careers, things like that, can be good, and it can have its downfalls as well. So women, they usually return to the job life after they raise their children and their children leave home, and there's a whole lot more skill sets that are needed to be successful in the job market previously that they didn't know about. So, and then we're going to talk about leisure just real quick. As you head into your 60s in middle age adulthood, there's more to life than just work. So more and more people decide to go on vacations, do things they normally didn't do and experience because as they get older, they realize there's much to work, or there's much more to life than just work. So they kind of start to shift that balance to more leisure than work. So this wraps us up for 8.3. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll talk to you soon.